Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me in life that you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was just going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog Frankie, and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with Frankie in the snow and snowboarding. In the evenings, I played PlayStation or listened to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog's company and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. The 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games, and watching DVDs. That day, it was a pretty heavy snowfall, so instead of hitting the slopes, I stayed in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had just been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut in like me. Alright, whatever. The footprints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog Frankie was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in the bed and stayed silent. I was honestly freaked out, and I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 10 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Well, fine, I can't say no to him. So we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the footprints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but all right, maybe there's some forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But forget this, I didn't want to chase anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in my bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Frankie also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what, I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well-built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. As soon as I went outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Was it all in my head? What about Frankie hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It looked really tall, like 8 or 9 feet, and it was really skinny. It was squatted on one branch and its long white arms were extended above its head, holding on to the branch above it, while its mouth was wide open with no expression. What the heck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing and stood just staring. It sat there motionless. I noticed Frankie stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction. But something in my head kept screaming not to, so I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Frankie with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Frankie seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open that door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning. It didn't take me long to pack everything and get the hell out of there. This all happened during the winter months of 2012. Around that time, my dad got a new job that required us to move, not a small move. It was a good 9 hours away from the house I grew up in. We hired a moving truck, but we took on the task of getting our car down to the new house. This time of year also happened to be around the time I was learning to drive. I guess my dad thought 9 hours on the highway would be good practice for me, so the plan was for me and my dad to drive the car down to the new house while my mom and my sisters would fly. I wasn't exactly looking forward to the drive. Not because of the time, I didn't really mind that part. I was more so worried about the blizzard my phone was showing we would hit halfway into our trip. Driving in the snow as a new driver is not something I really ever wanted to experience. My dad dismissed this, though, telling me it wasn't that bad and that, for the most part, it would just feel the same as normal driving anyway. We left around 3 p.m., so we were set to get to the new house at around midnight. Come around 8 p.m., we got hit by the blizzard. It was a lot more extreme than I'd imagined it would be. Although my dad must have trusted my inexperienced driving for whatever reason, as he never once said anything about him wanting to take over the wheel, so I kept going. Eventually, my nightmare would come true. I lost control of the car, and we were sent sliding off the road towards a line of trees. In the moment, I tried my best to avoid them, but the car slightly grazed one of them. Luckily, I don't think my dad was that mad. It's not like we hit a tree head-on at full speed. We got out to assess the damage, and by some miracle, there was nothing but a slight scratch on the back passenger side door. I held back a laugh of genuine relief. Just then, I noticed a vehicle coming up the road with some extremely bright high beams on. As it got closer, it started honking and continued doing so until it pulled up right next to us. The guy rolled down his window. I figured he was going to ask us if we needed help, but no. He looked at us and began some awkward small talk, completely ignoring the situation we were currently in. My dad just kind of looked at the dude and told him we didn't have time to talk and asked what he needed. The guy responded with something like, "Oh, I just noticed you dropped something about a mile back. I think it fell into your trunk." Now, we did have a few things in our trunk that we didn't send with the moving truck, but there was no way any of it could have fallen out, or at least I thought. I looked at my dad and asked him if there was any way something could have fallen out. My dad started his response but was interrupted by the man saying, "Well, you must have because I was right behind you. It's in my back seat here. Why don't you go ahead and get it so I can get out of here?" I figured it couldn't hurt to look just in case we actually had dropped something somehow, but right as I put my hand on the guy's backseat door handle, my dad abruptly yelled at me, saying that we didn't lose anything and to get back in our car immediately. A few seconds of silence with my hand still on the door handle went by. Yelling was completely out of character for my dad, though I eventually listened to him and got back in our car. We drove off with not another word being said by either us or the guy. I couldn't help but notice the extremely disturbing and almost angry face of the driver as we drove past him. Once we got a few miles down the road, my dad apologized for yelling at me. I, of course, told him it was fine, just that I wasn't really expecting it. I will never forget what he said next. He said he felt like he had to because, while I was heading towards the guy's back door through the window, he could just barely make out the silhouettes of two men waiting on the other side. He further explained that, by the looks of their movements as I was walking towards the door, upon opening the door I would either be attacked, kidnapped, or worse. Hearing this was a complete shock to me, but to this day I'm still glad my dad told me what he saw. It taught me at a young age that not everyone has the best intentions in this world. However, at the end of the day, we can't 100% confirm the guy had bad intentions, but I myself truly believe my dad's instincts were correct. The whole situation just didn't add up. Why would there have been two men waiting right at the door for me to open it? And on top of that, when we got to our new house, we were able to verify that nothing was missing from our trunk. My whole life, I had been an avid skier. When I was younger, my parents had me compete, and I was actually quite good. My parents had 4 kids, including me, and I was the youngest girl, having 1 sister and 2 brothers. We live in Maine, so we get plenty of snow in the winter, and there's plenty of resorts local to us. I am now in my early 20s and in my final year of college. I go to school in-state, so for the past 3 years, I have been working at a local ski resort giving lessons to small kids during the winter. Of course, it is a fun job and has brought me much joy, but even a job as innocent as that can have its disadvantages. What I'm about to tell you happened last season at one of the training sessions with the kids. I was doing a session with 6 kids, and the day was going well so far. This really wasn't a large group in particular, and all of the parents seemed to hang around and watch their kids that day. I don't have a problem with that, and it actually made me happy to see that they cared, because usually, they would drop them off to me and then go have fun on the slopes. The kids always seemed to do better when their parents hung around and watched and they had their support. There was this one dad there in particular who kept trying to get my attention, making jokes and trying to catch my gaze from time to time. I had a boyfriend that I cared for deeply, plus old creepy bald guys are not my type. When the lesson was over, I went up to the ski lodge to warm up and change out of my gear. That was my last lesson of the day, and I was ready to get home. Plus, I knew my cat was probably starving. I went into the changing area for ladies and began to get changed. It was a restroom area in there as well, so with all my gear off, I ran over to use the restroom, basically in my underwear. Now, I'm in the stall doing my business when I heard the door to the locker room area open. I didn't think anything of it besides the fact that I had my stuff all over the floor. But then something happened that made my heart drop. The person had coughed, and it was clearly a guy. Holy crap, I thought, did this guy get confused, or did he mean to walk into the ladies' area? I sat there silently as I listened for his every move. I heard my noisy snow pants being moved around on the floor, then the sound of my keys falling off the bench and hitting the floor. My phone was out there as well, so I had no chance of calling anyone, and confronting the jerk in my underwear didn't seem like a good idea either. My fears were starting to materialize right in front of me as I could hear the man starting to take deep inhales through his nose. Was this creep out there sniffing my clothes? It briefly went silent, and then footsteps could be heard coming back towards the restroom stalls where I was. There were only about 6 or so stalls, so he was for sure going to find me. The sound of the stall door right next to me swinging open with a bang almost made me scream and give up my location. This guy was now looking for me. He then opened the stall door next to that one with another crash echoing through the empty locker room. I was going to have to slip out from under the stall door and make a run for it. I remember thinking, I'm only 5 feet 5 inches and like 126 pounds. I don't think I could put up much of a fight. Right when I was about to slip out and make a break for it, my stall door swung open violently, revealing the man to me. I yelled for him to get the back, and he just looked at me with a weird smirk on his face. Then it hit me. This was the same guy who had been hitting on me earlier during my ski lessons with the kids. He took a step towards me, almost salivating, seeing me in my underwear. Fear had taken over me. I found it hard to find my voice, wanting to let out a scream for my life. But suddenly, music to my ears, the sound of the Raleigh cart the janitors used could be heard entering the rest area. The guy realized what was happening as well, and he fled from the area as quickly as he could. Immediately, I started to sob, and the 2 cleaning ladies ran to check on me. I didn't have to say anything for the cleaning ladies to figure out what was happening. One of the ladies ran off to alert the security. I let the one that was with me know I was fine, and I hurried over to my stuff and got dressed. By the time I walked out of the locker room area, the resort security had the guy in cuffs, and he would soon be arrested by the local authorities. I didn't let that deter me, and I still do lessons at that same resort. But to the locker room creeper, let's not meet again. Thinking about this whole experience still scares me even today. This happened when I was 18. I had just finished up my first semester of college, and a couple of friends I had met their plan to rent out a cabin on some lake over the weekend through Airbnb. They asked if I wanted to go, and I said yeah. I didn't really know much about the destination, but I decided I'd go regardless. I was done with finals and honestly felt like I could just use some solid time away from it all. So my two friends and I, who I'll just call Edsel and Nolan, were set to leave. The cabin was about an hour away. When we arrived, we unpacked the stuff we brought for the weekend and got settled inside. The first night was honestly kind of creepy, at least for me, because the cabin was pretty remote. It was the only one on the lake, and as far as I'm concerned, it was the only one within miles of nothing but forest. I'm someone who's used to being in cities with lots of people, not quite forests with the occasional howl of coyotes. Needless to say, it was for sure a scene I would have to get used to, but all things considered, the first night was completely fine. It was the second night where things took a turn. All throughout the second day, a blizzard took place outside. We didn't really plan for it. I guess none of us thought to check the weather before making the trip. I mean, you gotta remember, all three of us were only 18 at the time, so not the brightest. Anyway, on the second night, Edsel and I slept in our own bedrooms upstairs, while Nolan slept on a couch downstairs. I think it was around 3 a.m. when Nolan came upstairs and woke both of us up, seeing how the outside motion light kept turning on and off again. Edsel told him it was most likely just an animal activating it or the light simply being activated by the motion of the falling snow. But what Nolan responded with was pretty terrifying. He explained how that's what he thought too, but after looking outside, he saw what he described as something resembling the shadow of a person and around 6 feet tall. This definitely freaked us out a bit, but Edsel, who was still convinced it had to be an animal, said he would go downstairs to check it out. And so that's what he did. Meanwhile, Nolan and I stayed upstairs. A good 3 minutes went by when a blood-curdling scream rang out downstairs. Nolan and I ran downstairs as fast as we could. Edsel was lying on the floor and pointing at the living room window. We looked out the window, but there was nothing. He practically screamed at us to go upstairs, and so the three of us did. The rooms in the cabin didn't have locks, so we resorted to barricading ourselves in one of the bedrooms. Edsel quietly explained to us that when he got downstairs, he started by looking at all the kitchen windows. When he didn't see anything, he made his way to the living room window. He pulled back the curtain and, at first, saw nothing, just an empty snowy forest. He literally saw pure black darkness. Confused, he cupped his hands to his eyes and got closer to the window. But that's when he realized it was a person blocking the view. He then screamed and fell back. Now, at this point, I hadn't seen anything myself. Don't get me wrong, I was still horrified, but in the back of my mind, I still wasn't ruling out the fact that we might have just been imagining things. Just then, the power cut out. It felt like my heart had completely stopped for at least 5 seconds. I was now hysterical. At this point, all doubt I had in the sightings Edsel and Nolan experienced instantly vanished. I genuinely felt like my life was over in that moment. We had no weapons and, worse yet, no phone service. All we could do was sit and wait until daylight. Fortunately, nothing further occurred in that time. Once the sun was up, we took down the barricade and all started getting our stuff. We had no intentions of staying there any longer than we needed to. It was still snowing, but luckily, the vehicle we brought was good in the snow. Before we left, we took a quick survey of the outside area around the cabin. There were no footprints, but this was likely because they were filled in by the snow. This had to have been the case, as there were no footprints by the fuse box outside, yet it was completely destroyed. It looked like it was smashed in multiple times by an axe. The sight of this was enough to get us to leave immediately. Later, we tried contacting the Airbnb owner, but we got no response. I always thought this was weird. I mean, if your fuse box got completely destroyed, I'd imagine you'd want to talk to the people renting the cabin at the time. But no, not even a text back from the guy. I stayed friends with Edsel and Nolan throughout the rest of college. We would talk about the experience from time to time, but for the most part, we kept it to ourselves. We still don't know who was stalking us in the woods that night or what their intentions were. Start this off, I am not a winter sports person by any means, nor do I claim to be. I've been a few times with family and friends, but that would be the extent of my experience. I had an ex-girlfriend who, at the time when we were dating, liked to test me in many ways, some good, some not so good. Random ski trip when we were on vacation in Japan. I'll let you be the judge of that. This all took place a few years ago when we were still dating. She used to travel a lot, doing cool humanitarian things around the world, and I, for the most part, stayed local and worked a normal job. She and I both had vacation time that we needed to adventure ahead of us. Before the year was out, she made a suggestion that we go to Japan for a week or so. Being a huge anime fan, I could not help but become excited. It even overshadowed all the possible arguments we would probably have just existing around each other for that long of uninterrupted time. I agreed to go, and she took care of all the planning and travel accommodations. The time came, and we boarded our flight to the land of the rising sun. Other than the flight being horribly long, it was otherwise non-eventful. We would be staying in 3 different locations over the week that we would be visiting there. The first being in Tokyo, one in the countryside where a friend of hers lived from college, and our last residency would be in a ski lodge in the snow-covered mountains to the north. I did not know she had planned a ski trip, but whatever, I was already there. What could go wrong? The first few days went by fast, much faster than one would like when being in such a cool place. The people, the culture, the food, everything was so much more than I could ever hope for. Friday night rolled around, and we took the 6-hour bus ride to the ski resort where we would be staying that weekend. The bus traveled through the night, so we arrived early Saturday morning. The scenery was amazing and also intimidating. We got checked in and headed back to our room, where we would get some much-needed rest before hitting the slopes. After waking up and getting dressed, we went down to the rental station to get all of our equipment. She got skis, and I went for the snowboard. I had never really snowboarded before, but I had picked up longboarding a few months prior, so I figured it could not have been too much of a difference. Now being fully equipped, we made our way to where the ski lifts were. There was a map that showed all the different slopes you could take, but obviously, everything was in Japanese, so it didn't make it easy. It didn't help that the colors used to mark the trails were not your normal red for hardest, green for easiest type of deal. Instead, black, purple, orange, and yellow were what was in front of us. So we decided to take the black route, which seemed to be the most mild out of the bunch. We hopped on the ski lift, which took us up the mountain, giving us a supreme view of the resort. The snow was starting to come down a good bit, which added to the amazing backdrop. Taking in all the sights around me, I did not realize one very important thing. We had ridden the lift very high up the mountain and basically to the top. We dropped off the lift at the summit of the mountain. It was around dusk, and there was not a soul in sight. Not to mention, at the top of the mountain, the snow was falling quite heavily. I think we messed up. I yelled out over the harsh winds. I could tell she was nervous, not being the most proficient skier herself, but we had no choice. We started to try and make our way down the mountain. I quickly learned my longboard skills did not equate to snowboard skills. I would pick up speed rapidly, then fall onto my butt repeatedly. The snow was falling so hard that within minutes I lost sight of my girlfriend. I called out for her, but nothing could be heard but the wind and the snow pelting my helmet. I didn't want to risk distancing us more, so I unclipped myself from my board and began to walk along the edge of the slopes nearest to the tree line. That was the only place where the snow was not up to my knees. I was now in whiteout conditions, the likes of which I had never been a part of before. Besides, we don't get much snow back in Southern California. I was becoming dangerously cold, and my girlfriend was still nowhere to be found. I kept a slow pace down the side of the mountain in hopes that I would see her ride past, but after about 20 minutes of that not happening, I started to think maybe I was the one that had fallen behind and she had passed me in the dense snowfall. The slope that we had chosen to take had not been the easiest at all. This one was by far the steepest. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I could hear my name being called ever so faintly in the distance. I turned around, trying my best to clear the snow from my goggles to see where it was coming from. Like a fuzzy picture becoming clearer by the second, my girlfriend could be seen emerging from the frozen tundra, sitting and riding on her skis like some sort of sled. I called back to her, and she coasted over to where I was. She was crying and all shaken up, thinking that she had lost me for good on that mountain. I assured her I was fine and just a little frozen. Then we carried on down the mountain. After about 15 to 20 minutes of walking, the lights of the resort dimly came back into view. I had never been so happy to see civilization in my life. Eventually, we made it back inside the lodge, where it was now packed, unlike before when we came in all snowy with our gear. We were getting a lot of weird stares when we went to return the gear. The clerk asked what we had been doing. I looked at him with a dumbfounded look on my face because we were literally turning in our gear. How could he ask such a thing? I stated the obvious: we had just come in from hitting the slopes. He had a very shocked look about him. What? I asked. The mountain has been closed for the last couple of hours due to the storm that rolled in. Being up there in these conditions could be a death sentence. My girlfriend and I looked at each other with looks of terror as we made our way to our room. I definitely felt a sense of impending doom. She said we had a laugh, showered, and were back on a plane to California the next morning. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.